The mail-order bride showed up crying. Then the giant rancher said, "You don't have to pretend with me." The train doors slam. A young woman steps onto a frozen platform, clutching nothing but a wrinkled letter and her tears. The townsfolk whisper, the church bell tolls, and boots scrape on snow. She came west expecting a husband. But the truth is, her letter was a lie. Now, stranded in a land ruled by cattle barons and railroad men, she finds shelter in the home of a towering rancher, kind but carrying scars of his own. Just as warmth flickers between them, danger strikes. The railroad claims his land. The townsfolk turn against her, and whispers grow louder. One deed could save everything or destroy it. But only if the woman branded as a fraud dares to speak the truth. In a world where lies can kill and kindness can cost everything, will she run from shame or stay and fight for the only place she's ever been wanted? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments, your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The wind whistled through Silver Cross's empty streets as Zeke's wagon creaked away from the station. Matilda huddled deeper into her thin shawl, her shoulders shaking with each quiet sob. The leather reins felt rough against Zeke's calloused hands as he guided the horses past the darkened storefronts. "Take your time, Miss Jameson," he said softly. "You're safe here." His gentle tone only seemed to make her cry harder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, dabbing at her eyes with a threadbare handkerchief. "You must think me terribly weak." "No, ma'am." Zeke kept his eyes on the road ahead, giving her privacy in her distress. "Reckon anyone would be scared, traveling so far from home." The wagon wheels crunched through patches of early snow as they passed the edge of town. Matilda's tears gradually slowed as she stared at the vast Colorado landscape stretching before them. The setting sun painted the winter sky in shades of purple and gold. I should tell you the truth," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Above the wagons, creaking, "It's a letter you received. I didn't write it." Zeke nodded slowly, unsurprised. He'd suspected as much from her reaction at the station. "Who did?" "My brother Timothy." Her fingers twisted the handkerchief. "After our mother died, father remarried. Our stepmother. She made it clear I wasn't welcome. Timothy said he'd found me a good Christian husband out west. He showed me your response, told me everything was arranged." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "But when I arrived in Denver, there was no one to meet me. I learned Timothy had left town weeks ago, owing money to half the merchants there." The confession hung heavy in the cold air between them. Zeke's jaw tightened as he considered the cruelty of abandoning a sister to such uncertainty. "Does anyone know where your brother went?" Matilda shook her head. "The station master in Denver said he'd headed south. I spent what little money I had left on the ticket here, hoping." Her voice broke. "I didn't know what else to do." "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Miss Jameson." Zeke's quiet words carried the weight of experience. Sometimes what seems like tragedy leads us to where we need to be. She looked up at him then, really studying his face for the first time. The lines around his eyes spoke of both sorrow and kindness. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible burden. "You're very kind, Mr. Brannan," she said softly, "but I can't impose on you. Perhaps there's work in town, sewing or cleaning. You'll stay at my ranch." He interrupted gently but firmly, "At least until spring. The winter's too harsh for a lady to be alone in town." He gestured at the gathering clouds. "Got a proper guest room, meals on the table, and plenty of honest work if you're willing. No strings attached." Matilda's hands trembled in her lap. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, remembering his late wife's final days. "Because everyone deserves shelter from the storm, Miss Jameson. Both the ones that rage outside and the ones that trouble our hearts." The wagon crested a small hill, revealing a sprawling ranch in the valley below. A two-story house stood proudly. Against the mountainous backdrop, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a large barn and several smaller outbuildings, all well-maintained. "It ain't much," Zeke said apologetically, "but it's home." Matilda gazed at the peaceful scene, hardly daring to hope. "It's beautiful," she whispered. As they drew closer to the house, a dog's bark echoed across the yard. A large brown mutt came bounding out to meet them, tail wagging furiously. "That's Moses," Zeke explained with a hint of warmth in his voice. "He's friendly as can be, just excited to meet somebody new." The dog circled the wagon as they came to a stop, and Matilda couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. It was her first genuine smile since arriving in Silver Cross. Zeke climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His large hand was steady as she stepped down, and for a moment she felt truly anchored for the first time in months. "I'll show you to your room," he said, lifting her small carpet bag. "Then we can get some hot food in you. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, makes the best biscuits this side of the Mississippi." Matilda followed him up the porch steps, Moses trotting happily beside them. The house was warm and smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. Simple but comfortable furnishings filled the rooms they passed through. "The guest room's up here," Zeke said, leading her up a narrow staircase. "It ain't fancy, but it's clean and quiet." The room was small but welcoming, with a neat bed covered in a colorful quilt and a window overlooking the mountains. A sturdy dresser stood against one wall, and a rocking chair sat in the corner. "You can stay as long as you need," Zeke said, setting down her bag. "No one will bother you here." Matilda turned to him, eyes brimming with grateful tears. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Brannon." "No thanks needed, Miss Jameson." He tipped his hat. "Just rest now. Supper's at 6 o'clock if you feel up to joining me." As he turned to leave, Matilda found her voice again. "Mr. Brannon." He paused in the doorway. "Yes. I promise I won't be a burden. I can work hard, cooking, cleaning, whatever's needed." Zeke's expression softened. "You ain't a burden, Miss Jameson. You're a child of God who needed help. That's all there is to it." With that, he left her alone in the quiet room. Matilda sank onto the bed, running her hands over the soft quilt. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she felt something like peace stealing over her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had found shelter from more than just the winter storms. The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen earth as they left Silver Cross behind. Zeke handled the reins with practiced ease, guiding his team of horses along the rutted trail. Beside him, Matilda kept her thin shawl pulled tight, her eyes wide as she took in the vast Colorado landscape. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across snow-dusted fields. They passed a small white church, its windows dark and shuttered. Against the winter cold, Matilda's gaze lingered on the simple cross atop its steeple. "Does anyone hold services there?" she asked softly, her first words since they'd left town. "Pastor comes through once a month, weather permitting." Zeke adjusted his grip on the reins. "Rest of the time, folks gather for Bible reading when they can. Winter makes it hard, with the homesteads spread so far apart." They rolled past several snow-drifted cabins, thin wisps of smoke rising from stone chimneys. Ancient cottonwoods lined the frozen creek bed, their bare branches reaching toward the pearl-gray sky. "How far apart are the farms?" Matilda asked, watching a distant rider disappear over a ridge. "Closest neighbors 3 miles east," Zeke replied. "Morton family, good people. Next closest is 5 miles west. Out here, you learn to be self-sufficient." He paused, then added quietly, "and to trust in the Lord's guidance through the lonely times." "The winters must be difficult," Matilda ventured, noting the vast emptiness around them. Zeke nodded. "Storms can blow up quick. sometimes last for days. You learn to watch the sky, keep extra supplies stored. His steady voice carried years of experience. But there's peace in it, too. Time for reflection, prayer. My late wife used to say the quiet helped her hear God's whispers better. Matilda noticed how his shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of his wife, but his hands remained steady on the reins. They traveled in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. "What are those tracks?" she asked suddenly, pointing to marks in the snow beside the trail. "Okay," Zeke answered, pleased by her curiosity. "They come down from the high country when winter sets in. Lord provides for all his creatures, even in the hardest seasons." As dusk settled over the land, they crested a small rise. Below them stood Zeke's ranch house, lamplight glowing warmly through frost-touched windows. The two-story structure was larger than Matilda had expected, with a wraparound porch and sturdy barn nearby. Zeke helped her down from the wagon, then led her up the porch steps. Inside, the kitchen was filled with the comforting sense of wood smoke and fresh coffee. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its cheerful flames pushing back the evening chill. Mata stood in the doorway, taken aback by the unexpected size and tidiness of the home. Dark wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and a neat row of copper pots hung above the cookstove. Everything spoke of care and order. "Please, sit." Zeke gestured to the kitchen table, already set with 2 places. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." He served them both bowls of steaming beans and thick slices of golden cornbread. The simple meal smelled wonderful to Matilda, who hadn't eaten since early morning. But as she lifted her spoon, the weight of her deception became too heavy to bear. "Mr. Brannan," she began, her voice trembling, "I must tell you something." Her fingers twisted in her lap as tears welled in her eyes. "The letter you received, it wasn't from me. My brother Timothy, he wrote it without my knowledge." Zeke set down his spoon, giving her his full attention. The lamplight cast gentle shadows across his weathered face as he listened. "He took what little money I had," she continued, the words tumbling out. "Said he'd found me a good Christian husband out west. But it was all lies." A sob caught in her throat. "I never meant to trick anyone into marriage. I didn't know about the letter until we were already on the train to Denver. Then Timothy disappeared, leaving me with nothing but the clothes I'm wearing." She waited for anger, for harsh words, or a command to leave. Instead, Zeke bowed his head. In the quiet kitchen, his deep voice offered a simple prayer. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for safe travel, and for bringing Miss Jameson to shelter. Guide us in your wisdom and mercy. Amen." When he looked up, his eyes held only compassion. "There's no shame in being wronged by others, Miss Jameson. You can stay here until spring. Get your bearings. My home is large enough, and winter's no time for anyone to be without shelter." Fresh tears spilled down Matilda's cheeks, but these were tears of relief. "You're very kind, Mr. Brannan. I don't deserve such mercy." "Ain't about deserving," he said gently. "It's about doing what's right. Now eat your supper while it's hot. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." They finished their meal in companionable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote welcoming the night. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the winter sky, their light cold and clear above the sleeping land. The kitchen grew dim as evening settled over the ranch. Matilda helped clear the supper dishes while Zeke built up the fire against the deepening cold. The comfortable silence between them was broken by heavy footsteps on the porch. Followed by a sharp knock, Cal Whitaker, the ranch foreman, stepped inside in a swirl of snow. His weathered face was grim as he removed his hat, shaking ice from its brim. He nodded briefly to Matilda before turning to Zeke. "Evening, boss. Got some trouble brewing." Cal's voice was low and serious as he dusted snow from his heavy coat. "Railroad surveyors rode through earlier while you were in town. Spare were down by the creek, pounding stakes in the ground like they owned it." Zeke's expression darkened. "Did they say anything to you?" "Sure did." Cal moved closer to the fire, his boots leaving wet marks on the floorboards. "Said that water rights deed from your late wife's family ain't worth the paper it's written on. Claimed all that land belongs to the railroad now, creek and all." The muscles in Zeke's jaw tightened. Without a word, he strode to the corner of the room, where a heavy wooden chest sat beneath a window. The key's iron teeth scraped in the lock as he opened it, revealing neat stacks of yellowed papers inside. Matilda stood awkwardly by the hearth, trying to make herself invisible as she watched Zeke rifle through the documents with increasing urgency. His large hands, usually so steady, began to tremble slightly as he reached the bottom of the chest. "It's not here." His voice was barely above a whisper. "The deed. It's gone." Cal cursed under his breath, then quickly mumbled an apology when he remembered Matilda's presence. "You sure, boss? Maybe it got filed with something else." "No." Zeke straightened slowly, his height seeming to fill the room. "I always kept it. Right here, with the property papers." He ran a hand through his hair, betraying his distress. "Without that deed, they'll take the water rights," Cal finished grimly. "And without water access, the ranch dies." Zeke's words fell heavy in the firelit room. Mateo shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder on their troubles. "I should go upstairs," she murmured, moving toward the door. "Miss Jameson," Zeke's gentle tone stopped her. "Please don't. Think you're any burden in this? These troubles aren't of your making." She nodded quickly, unable to meet his kind eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Brannon. I hope things work out with the railroad." "The Lord will provide," Zeke answered, though his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Cal, we'll need to ride out at first light. Check every stake they've put down. And I'll have to send word to Judge Parker in Denver." Cal nodded. Grimly, "I'll tell the hands to keep watch. Railroad might try moving in quick. Now they think they've got the upper hand." Matilda slipped quietly up the narrow stairs to the guest room as the men continued their discussion. The room was small, but neat, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a small lamp on the bedside table. She lit the lamp with trembling fingers, then sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the wind howl outside the frost-covered window. The ranch's troubles weighed heavily on her mind. Here was Zeke Brannon, a man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, when he had every right to turn her away, now facing the loss of everything he'd worked for. He was a giant of a man, strong enough to intimidate anyone who crossed him, yet he'd spoken to her with such gentleness, offered shelter without hesitation. Why would someone already carrying such burdens bother to protect a stranger? The question haunted her as she changed into her nightgown, her only spare garment carefully packed in her small bag. She could hear the murmur of voices downstairs, the occasional heavy tread of boots. As Zeke and Cal continued their planning, the wind rattled the window panes, making eerie sounds in the darkness beyond. Matilda lay in bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin, but sleep refused to come. Her mind kept returning to the look of quiet devastation on Zeke's face when he couldn't find the deed. She'd caused enough trouble already, arriving under false pretenses, accepting his charity. The least she could do was stay out of the way while he fought for his land. She made a silent resolution in the darkness. She would not add to his burdens. She would help where she could, keep quiet when she couldn't, and pray for God to show her how to repay this good man's kindness. Downstairs, after Cal had gone back to his cabin, Zeke sat alone in his study. The lamp cast a warm circle of light on his desk as he bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, his deep voice rough with emotion, "I need your strength now more than ever. Show me the path through this valley. Help me protect what you've entrusted to me, this land and the people who depend on it." He paused, drawing a shaky breath. "And Lord, thank you for sending Miss Jameson to us, even in these troubled times. Help me be worthy of the trust you've placed in me to keep her safe." The wind continued its mournful song outside as Zeke remained in prayer, seeking guidance in the quiet hours of the night. Above him, Matilda finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, while beyond the warm walls of the ranch house, snow began to fall more heavily across the disputed land. Dawn crept over the horizon in shades of steel gray, bringing with it a bitter wind that rattled the window panes of the ranch house. Matilda woke early, her internal clock still set to the rhythms of her old life. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she dressed quickly in the cold room. Pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders, uncertain of her role in this temporary haven, she made her way downstairs. The sound of steady chopping drew her to the kitchen window, where she spotted Zeke already at work. His broad shoulders swung in a practiced rhythm as he split kindling. His breath visible in the frosty air, Ma hesitated by the back door, gathering her courage before stepping. Outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow, making her gasp softly. Zeke paused mid-swing, turning at the sound. "Morning, Miss Jameson. Hope the cold didn't wake you." "No, sir," she replied, hugging herself against the chill. I was wondering how I might help. I don't want to be idle." He considered her request, leaning on the axe handle. "Fire needs tending, and coffee would be welcome." Beyond that, he gestured toward the kitchen. "Make yourself at home. Ranch needs feeding, and I reckon you know your way around a stove." Relief flooded through her at having a purpose. "Yes, sir. I can manage that." Inside, Matilda set about her tasks with determination. She built up the fire with careful attention, just as her mother had taught her years ago. The coffee pot bubbled promisingly on the stove as she explored the pantry, finding ingredients for a simple breakfast of biscuits and gravy. The days that followed fell into a steady rhythm. Each morning, Matilda rose to tend the fire and prepare meals. Zeke took time between his duties to show her the workings of ranch life, where to find eggs in the henhouse, how to operate the pump without freezing it, which bins held feed, for which animals Cal Whitaker's initial skepticism began to soften as he observed her diligence. On the third morning, when she brought hot coffee to the men working in the barn, he tipped his hat with genuine respect. "Much obliged, Miss Jameson. Ain't had decent coffee since." He caught himself glancing at Zeke, but Matilda understood. Since Zeke's wife had passed. By week's end, Zeke announced he needed to ride into town to check for telegraph messages about the railroad situation. "I'll be back before sunset," he promised, saddling his horse in the pale morning light. "Cal will be working the north pasture if you need anything." Matilda nodded, trying to hide her apprehension. "I'll keep the fire going." The afternoon stretched endlessly before her. Alone in the house for the first time, every creak and groan of the settling would made her start. The wind whistled through gaps in the window frames, sounding almost like voices. Twice, she thought she heard hoofbeats and rushed to the window, only to find empty yard before her. To keep her nerves steady, she threw herself into work, sweeping, kneading bread, organizing the pantry. She sang hymns under her breath as she worked, the familiar melodies bringing comfort to the empty rooms. The sun was settling toward the horizon when she finally heard real hoofbeats approaching. Zeke dismounted wearily, his expression grave. As he entered the kitchen, the warmth and smell of fresh bread enveloped him. "The railroad's already filed their paperwork in Denver," he said without preamble, removing his hat. "They're claiming all the water rights along the creek, saying the original grants were improperly recorded." He sank into a kitchen chair, looking more tired than Matilda had yet seen him. "We're facing a legal battle now." Matilda set a cup of hot coffee before him, wishing she could do more. "What will you do?" "Fight it," he said simply. "God didn't bring me through everything else to lose the ranch now." He took a slow sip of coffee. "But it won't be easy, or cheap." They sat down to a supper of beans, bread, and the last of the sit. Autumn preserves. Matilda watched Zeke push food around his plate, clearly preoccupied with his troubles. Unable to bear his silence any longer, she spoke up. "Mr. Brannan, I want to help more. There must be something I can do to earn my keep properly, especially now with these troubles coming." Zeke looked up, his expression softening. "Miss Jameson, do you know what I heard today, coming up the path?" He waited until she shook her head. "Singing. Haven't heard singing in this house since." He paused, emotion flickering across his face. "You've given me back the sound of someone singing in this house. That's more than enough." Matilda felt her cheeks grow warm, unsure how to respond to such gentle praise. She ducked her head, but a small smile played at her lips. Perhaps she wasn't such a burden after all. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song across the prairie, but inside, the warmth of shared company kept the bitter cold at bay. The week brought heavier snow, blanketing the ranch in deep drifts that transformed the landscape into endless waves of white. Inside the ranch house, lamplight cast a warm glow as evening settled over the land. The fire in the hearth crackled steadily, pushing back the persistent chill that crept through every crack and crevice. Zeke sat in his worn leather chair, the family Bible open across his broad lap. His deep voice filled the room as he read from the Book of Ruth, the familiar words carrying weight and comfort. Matilda perched nearby on a wooden stool, her nimble fingers working to mend a tear in his heavy work coat. The worn fabric felt rough against her hands, telling stories of long days and hard work. The peaceful atmosphere wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She found herself relaxing into the gentle rhythm of needle and thread, letting Zeke's steady voice wash over her. It had been years since she had known such tranquility, such simple contentment in doing ordinary tasks while sharing comfortable silence with another soul. When Zeke paused in his reading, Matilda's hands stilled. The firelight danced across her face as a memory surfaced, sweet and sudden. "My mother used to sing hymns while she worked," she said softly, almost to herself. She knew so many by heart. Zeke closed the Bible carefully, regarding her with gentle interest. What hymns did she favor? Amazing Grace was her favorite. Matilda smoothed the fabric beneath her fingers. She said it reminded her that hope could find you anywhere. "Would you share it?" Zeke asked, his voice carrying no pressure, only warmth. Maid hesitated, her cheeks coloring slightly. But something about the moment, the crackling fire, the snow-muffled world outside, Zeke's patient presence gave her courage. She began to hum, barely audible at first. The familiar melody emerged slowly, like a shy creature venturing into the light. As she continued, her voice grew steadier, though still soft. The hymn filled the room with its simple beauty, carrying with it echoes of Sunday mornings and her mother's voice twining with hers over the washtub or garden rows. Cal Whitaker appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound. He stood silent, his weathered face softening as he listened. The song spoke to something deep and universal, the yearning for grace, for home, for belonging. When the last note faded, he cleared his throat gruffly and moved quietly away, leaving Matilda and Zeke alone again. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Matilda's fingers returned to their mending, but her heart felt unusually full. Perhaps it was the memory of her mother, or the way the evening had wrapped them all in its gentle embrace. But she found herself wanting to share more. After the evening chores were done and Cal had retired to his cabin, Matilda set aside the mended coat. Her hands twisted in her lap as she gathered her courage. "Mr. Brannan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I haven't been entirely honest with you." Zeke sat forward slightly, his expression open and attentive. "Go on. My real name is Matilda Jameson." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked gently when she faltered. Matilda drew a shaky breath. "Of being sent away, of having nowhere else to go." She stared into the fire, finding strength in its steady glow. "My mother died when I was 15. Father remarried a year later, thinking we needed a woman's guidance. But my stepmother, she swallowed hard. She and her children treated me like a servant. Nothing I did was ever good enough." Zeke remained silent, but his presence encouraged her to continue. The whole story emerged gradually. Years of subtle cruelty, of being denied education while her stepsisters attended finishing school, of working from dawn to dusk with no kindness to soften the labor. "When my brother suggested the mail-order bride scheme, I thought," her voice caught, "I thought anything would be better than staying there. But he took my savings and abandoned me here instead." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I am sorry for deceiving you, even by omission." Throughout her tale, Zeke had listened without interruption, his face reflecting deep compassion. Now he leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Jameson, you have nothing to apologize for. The Lord brings people together in mysterious ways, and I believe He had a hand in bringing you here." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "This ranch has room enough for those who need shelter. You belong here as long as you wish to stay." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Matilda wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, the words seeming inadequate for the gift she had been given. In all her years of hardship, she had never encountered such simple, unconditional kindness. The lamp flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside, Matilda felt warmer than she had in years. Here, in this quiet room with its steady fire and steadfast company, she had found something rare and precious on the wild frontier, a place where truth could be spoken without fear, and grace was offered without price. Morning sun glinted off the fresh snow, turning the ranch into a dazzling landscape of white. Matilda stood at the kitchen window, hands deep in dishwater, when she spotted the first riders approaching. 3 women on horseback made their way slowly past the fence, line necks craning to peer at the house. Their scrutiny made Matilda's cheeks burn, and she ducked away from the window. Throughout the morning, more curious townsfolk found reasons to pass by. Some rode close enough that their whispered conversations drifted through the cold air. Matilda kept to her work inside, but each passing group left her more unsettled. She heard fragments of their speculation, mail-order fraud, and after his land. That made her hands tremble as she kneaded bread dough. Zeke noticed the traffic, but said nothing, going about his chores with the same steady purpose he always showed. His calm presence helped settle her nerves, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, judged, found wanting. A week passed, each day bringing more whispered speculation to their doorstep. When Sunday arrived, Zeke surprised her by asking if she'd accompany him to church. "Time you met Pastor Holt properly," he said over breakfast. "He's a good man." The little church stood white against the winter sky, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. As their wagon approached, Matilda's stomach twisted into knots. She smoothed her plain dress the best she owned, though worn at the cuffs, and tried to steady her breathing. Zeke helped her down from the wagon, his large hand gentle and sure. Together they walked toward the church steps, and Matilda felt every eye upon them. Whispers rippled through the gathering congregation as they made their way down the center aisle. She kept her eyes forward, though her cheeks flamed at the attention. Pastor Holt met them at the front of the church, his kind face creased in a welcoming smile. "Miss Jameson," he said warmly, taking her cold hands in his. "We're blessed to have you join us this morning." His genuine welcome eased some of her tension, but as they took their seats, Matilda felt the weight of suspicious stares. Ladies who had ridden past the ranch all week now sat in their Sunday best, heads bent together in whispered conversation. Their sideways glances made the wooden pew feel like a punishment bench. The service itself offered some comfort. Pastor Holt's sermon spoke of mercy and judgment, of seeing with God's eyes rather than man's limited vision. But even the familiar hymns couldn't fully soothe Matilda's growing unease. As the congregation filed out after the service, a well-dressed man approached them. His suit marked him as a town businessman rather than a rancher, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Brennan," he said smoothly. "Miss Jameson, is it? I'm Mr. Darrow, land agent for the railroad's interests in Silver Cross." He focused his attention on Matilda. "I couldn't help but notice there's been no posting of marriage bans, no proper documentation of your arrangement at the ranch." Zeke stepped slightly forward, his broad shoulders tensing. "Mr. Darrow, my arrangements are my own business." "Perhaps," Darrow continued, his voice carrying just far enough to reach nearby ears, but without proper papers, one might question the propriety of an unmarried woman's presence at your ranch, especially given the current dispute over your property rights." "That's enough," Zeke said curtly, his tone brooking no argument. "Good day, Mr. Darrow." He guided Matilda away with a gentle hand at her elbow, but the damage was done. She could hear the buzz of conversation rising behind them, could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. The ride home passed in heavy silence. Matilda's hands twisted in her lap, her thoughts churning with shame and fear. She had thought herself safe at last, had begun to believe she might find peace here. Now it seemed her presence would only bring trouble to the man who had shown her such kindness that evening. As they sat down to a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread, Matilda finally found her voice. "Mr. Brennan," she began, her words barely above a whisper, "I fear I'm bringing ruin to your good name." Zeke set down his spoon, regarding her with steady eyes. "How so?" "The gossip in town, Mr. Darrow's accusations." She swallowed hard. "Kindness in taking me in. They're twisting it into something shameful. With your water rights already threatened, my presence only gives them more reason to doubt your character." "Miss Jameson," Zeke said firmly, "look at me." He waited until she raised her eyes to his. "I've lived in this territory long enough to know that people will talk no matter what we do. But I judge by character, not by gossip. You've shown yourself to be honest, hardworking, and God-fearing. That matters more than any whispered words in town." Tears pricked at Matilda's eyes. "But your ranch, my ranch, stands or falls on truth. And right, not rumor," he interrupted gently. "The Lord knows our hearts, and that's what counts." His words carried conviction, but Matilda could see the weight of worry in the set of his shoulders, the slight furrow between his brows. The tension between his kindness and the scandal it had sparked hung in the air between them, as tangible as the steam rising from their bowls. They finished their meal quietly, each lost in thought. Outside, the winter wind moaned around the corners of the house, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the uncertainty in Matilda's heart. She had found sanctuary here, but now she wondered if that very refuge might prove costly to the man who had offered it so freely. The January days lengthened into a steady rhythm at the Brannan Ranch. Each morning brought new tasks, and Matilda found herself eagerly rising before dawn, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The work was hard but satisfying, filling her days with purpose she had never known before. In the barn, Matilda learned the art of mucking stalls, her movements becoming more confident with each passing day. The rich scent of hay and horse leather no longer seemed foreign, but comforting. Even the manor's cats had accepted her, winding around her ankles as she worked. "You've got a good touch with them animals," Cal remarked one morning, watching her lead to horses to water. "Most city folks take longer to adjust." Matilda smiled, patting the nearest horse's warm flank. "They make more sense than people sometimes," she admitted. No hidden meanings, no harsh words. Just honest needs. Zeke took time each day to teach her something new about ranch life. He showed her how to check the horse's hooves for stones, how to measure feed, and most importantly, how to guide a team. The first time she took the reins, her hands trembled. "Easy now," Zeke's deep voice steadied her. "They can sense your fear. Sit tall, hold firm, but gentle, like this." His large hands covered hers briefly, showing the proper grip. The wagon lurched forward, and Matilda gasped. But then the horses found their rhythm, responding to her tentative commands. Soon she was guiding them across the snowy field, her laughter ringing out across the crystalline air. "I never thought I could do this," she called back to Zeke, who watched with quiet pride. "You're a natural," he replied. And the warmth in his voice made her cheeks flush with more than just the cold. The creek became another daily lesson. Zeke taught her to check the ice, showing her where it ran thick enough to cross and where hidden currents made it treacherous. His face grew serious as he explained the vital importance of water rights in this arid land. "Without access to the creek, ranches can't survive," he explained, breaking a thin sheet of ice with his boot. "That's why the railroad's claim is so dangerous. They could cut off water to every homestead along this stretch." Matilda watched the water flow dark and swift beneath the ice. "Is that why the deed is so important?" "Yes. My late wife's father was one of the first settlers here. He made sure everything was legal and proper. Knew someday others would try to take it." Zeke's voice held both pride and worry. "That deed proves our right to the water. Without it, he didn't need to finish." Matilda had seen enough of frontier life to understand how quickly everything could be lost. Their days fell into comfortable patterns. After morning chores, they would work side by side, mending fences or cutting hay for the barn. Matilda's muscles ached at first, but grew stronger with each passing day. She learned to swing an axe, to coil rope properly, to judge weather from the way the wind shifted. But it was the evening walks she treasured most. As dusk painted the sky in deep purples and golds, they would walk along the line of cottonwoods bordering the creek. Their conversations flowed as naturally as the water beneath the ice, touching on memories both sweet and painful. Zeke spoke of his late wife, Sarah, of their dreams for the ranch and the children they had hoped to raise. Matilda shared stories of her mother's gentle ways and darker tales of her stepfamily's cruelty. Each confession brought them closer, building trust word by word. The house itself seemed to respond to their growing companionship. Rooms that had stood silent now rang with the sounds of life: kitchen clatter, boot steps on wooden floors, even occasional laughter. Matilda hung fresh curtains, kept bread baking in the oven, and filled the lonely corners with small touches of comfort. One evening, as they sat by the hearth after supper, Matilda worked on mending while Zeke cleaned his tack. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another across the snow-covered plains. "I've never been wanted before," Matilda said softly, her needle pausing in its work. "Not since Mother died. I was always a burden, something to be tolerated at best." Zeke set aside the bridle he was oiling. "You're no burden here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is your home for as long as you'll have it." Their eyes met across the warm space between them, and something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than gratitude or simple friendship. Matilda felt her heart flutter and quickly looked back at her mending. But she could feel Zeke's gaze lingering on her face, warm as the firelight. The peaceful moment was broken by heavy boots on the porch. Cal entered, stamping snow from his feet. His face was grim as he removed his hat. "Saw fresh tracks down by the south pasture," he reported. "Railroad men, by the look of their horses. Fancy breeds, city shod. And this time they had someone with them wearing a proper suit, lawyer, I'd wager." Zeke's jaw tightened. "They're moving faster than I expected." Still no sign of the deed. "Searched the whole house again yesterday." Cal shook his head. "Nothing. Whatever happened to it, it ain't here." The warmth of the evening seemed to fade, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. Matilda watched worry settle over Zeke's features like a shadow. All their moments of peace, of growing closeness, stood threatened by forces beyond their control. But she remembered his words about truth and right, about judging by character rather than circumstance. Whatever trouble approached, they would face it together. That thought gave her courage, even as she saw the concern deepen in Zeke's eyes. Word traveled fast in Silver Cross. By noon, every soul in town knew the railroad had filed their petition at the county courthouse. The news rippled through the general store, past the saloon, and into the church vestibule where ladies gathered. To discuss the latest developments, Matt stood in front of Hawkins Mercantile, clutching her shopping basket. She had come to town for supplies, flour, sugar, and lamp oil, but now hesitated at the threshold. Inside, she could hear whispered conversations stop as people noticed her presence. Their stares felt like physical pressure on her back as she moved between the shelves. "Miss Jameson." The smooth voice made her start. Mr. Darrow stood beside her, impeccably dressed in his city suit. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Might I have a moment of your time?" He gestured toward the relative privacy near the back of the store. Matilda's instincts warned her to refuse, but years of conditioning to be polite made her nod. She followed him to a quiet corner, keeping the basket between them like a shield. "Be direct," Darrow said, lowering his voice. "The railroad company understands your delicate situation. A young woman, alone, taken in under questionable circumstances." He paused, studying her reaction. "We're prepared to offer you compensation, $500 in cash, if you'll simply testify to certain facts about your arrangement with Mr. Brannan." Horror washed through Matilda as his meaning became clear. "You want me to lie?" she whispered. "To help you steal his land." "Not lie, my dear. Just confirm that he took you in under false pretenses. After all, there was no real marriage agreement, was there?" Darrow's smile turned cold. "The money would set you up nicely elsewhere, away from all this uncertainty." Matilda's hands clenched around her basket handles. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't help you hurt him." "Think carefully," Darrow warned. "A woman in your position can't afford to be particular about allies. When this gets ugly, and it will, you'll wish you had taken our offer." He placed a business card on top of her purchases and walked away, leaving Matilda trembling among the dry goods. The whole exchange had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had shattered her fragile sense of security. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Matilda's mind raced with Darrow's words, imagining all the ways her presence could damage Zeke's case. She had already brought scandal by living under his roof unmarried. Now the railroad would use that against him, twisting their kindness into something sordid at the ranch. She went through the motions of putting away supplies and starting supper. But her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the coffee pot. She said nothing about the encounter in town. But guilt ate at her like acid. As evening approached, voices drifted through the kitchen window. Cal and Zeke stood near the corral, their discussion growing heated enough for fragments to reach her. Ears. Double quotes. Can single quotes to fight this on testimony alone, Cal was saying. Without that deed, I know. Zeke's voice was tight with frustration. But it has to be somewhere. Sarah would never have. Maybe not, but facts are facts. Railroads got money, lawyers, and now they're pressing hard. Town's already starting to whisper. Matilda moved away from the window, unable to bear hearing more. She busied herself with folding the clean laundry, but every creak of the house, every distant voice made her jump. When would they realize she was a liability? How long before the town's whispers became shouts? After supper, they gathered in the main room as usual. Zeke sat in his chair by the fire, well-worn Bible in his large hands. His deep voice filled the room with familiar verses about faith and perseverance. But tonight, the words brought Matilda no comfort. She tried to focus on folding sheets, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The clean cotton blurred before her eyes as she imagined the shame that would come when the town turned against Zeke. They would say he had compromised his principles by harboring her. They would question his judgment, his morals, his right to the land itself. You seem troubled tonight, Zeke said softly. Closing his Bible. Matilde smoothed the sheet in her lap, unable to meet his eyes. Just tired, she lied, hating herself for the deception. But how could she tell him about Darrow's offer without revealing how much damage she could do to his case? The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with its lonely song. Matilda folded and refolded the same sheet, her movements mechanical as her mind churned with fear. She had found safety here, acceptance, maybe even the beginnings of love. But now that very happiness threatened to destroy the man who had offered it. The irony was bitter as gall in her throat. Cal's earlier words echoed in her mind. Can't fight this on testimony alone. She looked around the warm room at Zeke's strong profile in the firelight, at the home that had welcomed her so completely, and felt the weight of their precarious situation settle onto her shoulders like lead. The railroad was coming for everything Zeke had built, and her presence only gave them more ammunition. Darrow's business card seemed to burn in her apron pocket, a reminder that she could either betray Zeke directly or watch as her very presence slowly undermined him. Matilda stared into the fire, its warmth failing to reach the cold fear in her heart. She had never meant to bring such trouble to this peaceful place. Now, she wondered if anything she did could prevent the storm gathering on their horizon. The storms descended like God's own fury. Day after day, thick snow battered the valley, turning the world beyond the windows into a swirling white void. The temperature plummeted so low that metal stuck to bare skin, and breath froze into ice crystals before it could drift away. Ranch work became a battle against nature itself. Every morning before dawn, Zeke and Cal ventured out to break the thick ice forming over the cattle's water troughs. Their axes rang against the frozen surface, while bitter winds cut through their heaviest coats. The livestock needed constant attention, hungry, thirsty beasts that had to be fed regardless of whether Mad insisted on helping, despite Zeke's gentle protests. She learned to wrap her face against the cutting wind, leaving only her eyes exposed as she helped haul water from the well. Her hands, though wrapped in wool mittens, grew chapped and red from the cold. Still, she worked without complaint, grateful for tasks that kept her mind from darker thoughts. The sound of Darrow's smooth voice haunted her quiet moments. When this gets ugly, and it will, you'll wish you had taken our offer. Each time. She caught Zeke watching her with concern. Guilt twisted deeper in her chest. He had enough burdens without worrying about her too. One particularly bitter evening. As they huddled around the supper table, Zeke bowed his head to pray. His deep voice filled the kitchen with steady faith. Lord, grant us strength to weather these trials. Protect our livestock from the storm's fury. Guard our hearts against despair. And thank you for bringing new life to this home, even in winter's darkest hours. Matilda's eyes burned with unshed tears. She stared at her bowl of beans, unable to meet his gaze. The simple meal stuck in her throat, every bite flavored with shame. How could he thank God for her presence when she might be the very thing that destroyed everything he had built? Later that night, she stood at the window watching Zeke make one final check on the horses. His lantern bobbed through the darkness like a determined star, undaunted by the howling wind. The sight of his steadfast dedication made her heart ache. Inside the barn, she knew he would pause to pray, as he did each night. It was a habit she had noticed early on, that moment of quiet communion between man and Maker before retiring. Tonight, she whispered her own desperate prayer into the frost-rimmed glass. Please, Lord, don't let me be the ruin of this good man. Don't let my presence here destroy what he's built with such care. Show me the right path. The wind rattled the windows as if in answer, driving snow against the panes with renewed fury. Matilda wrapped her arms around herself, remembering another cold night not so long ago when she had stepped off that train, lost and afraid. Zeke had shown her nothing but kindness since that moment. How could she repay that kindness by becoming the weapon Darrow would use against him? She waited until the house grew still, only the crack and pop of the banking fire breaking the night's silence. Moving quietly, she gathered her few belongings, the patched shawl she had arrived in, a spare dress, the forged letter that had brought her here. Her hands trembled as she folded each item carefully. The letter she held longest, reading again her brother's false promises in the dim firelight. He had meant to abandon her to strangers, but instead she had found something precious and rare, a place where kindness ruled instead of cruelty, where faith lived in daily actions rather than empty words. And now she had to leave it all behind. Tears fell onto the creased paper as she tucked it away. Better to disappear now, before the railroad's lawyers could use her presence to paint Zeke as a man of questionable character. Better to carry these few warm memories than watch his reputation destroyed because he had shown mercy to a desperate stranger. She would leave at first light while the men were out tending to the morning chores. Perhaps she could make it too. The next town before the worst questions started. She had nothing to offer as a reference except the truth that she had known real goodness here, however briefly. Looking around the small guest room that had become her haven, Matilda whispered a final prayer into the darkness. Not for herself this time, but for the house and the man who had made it a home. For the legacy of his late wife Sarah, whose water rights now hung by such a slender thread. For Cal's gruff loyalty and the ranch hand's quiet respect. Keep them safe, Lord, she breathed. Let this house always be filled with kindness, long after I'm gone. The storm raged on outside, but within these walls, peace still reigned. Matilda lay down fully dressed, her small bundle ready beside the bed. She would need what rest she could get before facing tomorrow's bitter dawn and the long, cold road ahead. Sleep was slow to come as memories of the past weeks played through her mind. Zeke's patient teachings about ranch life, quiet evenings of scripture reading, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had never meant to care so deeply, never meant to find such belonging in this wild country. But that very belonging had become dangerous now. The railroad would use any weapon to claim this land, and she refused to be that weapon. Better to vanish like snow on the wind, leaving no trace to taint Zeke's good name. Dawn would come soon enough. Matilda pulled her shawl tighter, listening to the storm's fury and praying for strength to do what must be done. The pale light of dawn crept beneath heavy clouds, but the blizzard showed no signs of mercy. Wind howled through the cottonwoods, driving sheets of snow sideways across the frozen landscape. Matilda stood at the back door of the ranch house, her small bundle clutched to her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as she eased the door open, wincing at its soft creak. The bitter cold struck her like a physical blow. Snow immediately pelted her face, and the wind tried to tear away her shawl. She hesitated for only a moment, then stepped out into the storm. The door clicked shut behind her with a horrible finality. Deep drifts pulled at her skirts as she struggled. Forward, her feet, wrapped in 2 pairs of wool stockings inside her boots, quickly grew numb. The swirling snow made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. She thought she was heading toward the road, but the familiar landmarks had vanished in the white void. After what felt like hours of trudging through the deepening snow, Matilda realized with growing terror that she was lost. The wind had stolen all sense of direction. Her fingers, despite the mittens, had gone frighteningly numb. Each step became harder than the last as exhaustion and cold seeped into her bones. "Just keep moving," she whispered, her words torn away by the wind. But her legs trembled with fatigue, and her thoughts grew sluggish. When she stumbled into a deep drift, she found she barely had the strength to pull herself free. Back at the ranch house, Zeke emerged from the barn after the morning feeding. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't say what. The coffee pot had been warming on the stove by now, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma. Instead, the house stood silent and dark. He found the guest room empty, the bed cold. His heart clenched when he spotted the missing shawl and bag. Boot prints in the snow led away from the back door, already filling with fresh powder. "Cal!" he bellowed, running for the barn. "She's gone out in this." They saddled their horses quickly, though Cal argued it was madness to ride in such weather. "She couldn't have gotten far," Zeke insisted, his voice tight with worry. "We have to find her before this storm takes her." They separated to cover more ground, though visibility was poor. Zeke's horse fought against the wind as he searched, calling Matilda's name into the howling white void. His prayers grew more desperate with each passing hour. The temperature continued to drop, and he knew how quickly the cold could kill. Near mid-afternoon, his horse snorted and balked. Through the curtain of snow, Zeke spotted a dark shape huddled against a drift. His heart nearly stopped. "Matilda!" He leaped from the saddle, rushing to where she lay curled on her side, her skin frighteningly pale. When he touched her cheek, her eyes fluttered open, glazed with confusion. "I got lost," she whispered through blue-tinged lips. "I'm sorry. Hush now." Zeke shed his heavy coat, wrapping it around her as he lifted her into his arms. She felt terrifyingly light, like a child. He mounted carefully, holding her close against his chest to share what warmth he could. The ride back to the ranch was agonizingly slow. Matilda drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring apologies he could barely hear. Zeke's jaw clenched. With fear and something deeper, an emotion he wasn't ready to name, Cal had already returned and stoked up the fire when they arrived. Together, they settled Matilda in front of the hearth, piling her with blankets. Her skin was like ice, too. The touch. "Stay awake," Zeke commanded gently, chafing her cold hands between his. "Talk to me, Matilda. Why did you leave?" Tears leaked from her eyes, freezing on her cheeks. "I couldn't let them use me against you." "The railroad?" Darrow said. Her voice broke. "You've been so kind, given me your roof, your respect. I never deserved any of it. I'm nothing but trouble. Stop." Zeke's voice was rough with emotion. He cupped her face in his large hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me well, Matilda Jameson. You don't have to earn kindness. It's not a debt to be paid. And you don't have to pretend to belong here, you already do." She stared at him, trembling. But the town, the rumors. Let them talk. His thumb brushed away a tear. I know your heart. I've seen your courage, your faith, your gentle spirit. This is your home for as long as you want it. Don't you dare try to leave again. Fresh tears spilled over, but these seemed different, like relief, like hope. Matilda leaned into his touch, too exhausted to hide her feelings anymore. I don't want to leave, she whispered. I want to stay. Then stay. Zeke's voice was tender but firm. Stay and help me fight for this land. Stay and make this house a home again. Just stay. The fire crackled warmly as color slowly returned to Matilda's cheeks. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but it couldn't touch the peace that settled over. The room, she was where she belonged, not because she had earned it, but because love had made a place for her. The blizzard's fury gradually diminished to gentle snowfall over the next 2 days. Inside the ranch house, life moved at a slower pace as Matilda recovered from her ordeal. Zeke kept the fire well stocked, its warmth a constant comfort in the front room where Matilda rested on the settee. Wrapped in quilts, her fever came and went like waves, leaving her weak and shivering despite the heat. Zeke remained close, his large frame a steady presence as he tended to her needs. When she was lucid, he spooned warm chicken broth between her pale lips, his touch gentle despite his weathered hands. Small sips, he murmured, supporting her head. You need your strength back. During the worst hours of fever, when Matilda's thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind, Zeke's deep voice anchored her. He read from his worn Bible, choosing psalms that spoke of shelter and deliverance. The familiar words washed over her like cool water. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. His voice carried her through the darkness until dawn painted the frost-covered windows with pale light. As her fever finally broke on the second day, Matilda found herself studying Zeke's face while he read. The lamplight caught the silver threading. Through his dark hair, the worried crease between his brows, smoothing only when she managed to take more broth, when she could finally sit up without the room spinning. Matilda knew she had to speak the truth that had driven her into the storm. Her hands twisted in the quilt as she began. Mr. Brannon, Zeke, there's something I need to tell you. Her voice quavered. About Mr. Darrow. Zeke set aside his Bible, giving her his full attention. The weight of his gaze made her throat tight. With tears, but she pressed on. He came to me, offered money if I'd. She swallowed hard. If I'd testify against you. Say you took me in under false pretenses. He wanted to use me to weaken your claim to the land. She waited for anger, for disappointment, to darken his face. Instead, Zeke reached across and covered her trembling hands with his own. The warmth of his calloused palm steadied her. Truth stands taller than lies, he said softly. We'll face this together. The simple declaration broke something loose in Matilda's chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks as weeks of fear and shame drained away. Zeke squeezed her hands gently, letting her cry until the burden lifted. I was so afraid, she whispered. Afraid I'd bring nothing but trouble to your door. That the town's gossip would destroy everything you've built here. You brought life. Back to this house, Zeke countered, and gossip's just wind in empty branches. It's what's true that matters. Over the next day, as Matilda's strength returned, the tension that had gripped the house melted away like snow in sunshine. She could sit at the table again, sharing meals with Zeke and Cal. Her laugh, though still soft, rang out more freely. Even the rooms themselves seemed to breathe easier when the storm finally cleared, leaving the world sparkling white and clean. Zeke announced they needed to prepare for the courthouse hearing. The railroad's challenge to his water rights couldn't be ignored any longer. We'll need to gather every document we have, he said over breakfast. The deed may be missing, but We have other papers that prove our claim." He went to fetch his Bible, intending to pack it with the other documents they'd need. As he stood by the hearth, leafing through its well-worn pages, a folded paper slipped free, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Zeke bent to retrieve. It then went absolutely still. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully unfolded the yellowed document. "Matilda," he called, his voice rough with emotion. "Come see this." She crossed the room, steadying herself on the back of a chair. When she reached his side, he held out the paper for her to read. The formal legal language was clear. It was the missing water rights deed, signed and witnessed years ago. "Sarah must have tucked it here for safekeeping," Zeke said softly, speaking of his late wife. "She always said God's word would protect." What matters most? Matilda traced the precious document with gentle fingers. She was right. Without a word, they both knelt by the hearth. Zeke's large hand found hers as they bowed their heads in gratitude. The morning sun streamed through the windows, touching everything with gold. While they thanked God for his providence, when they rose, Matilda saw moisture in Zeke's eyes that had nothing to do with the wood smoke. He carefully folded the deed and placed it back in the Bible. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, his voice steady again. "Sometimes we just have to trust his timing." Matilda nodded, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. Her brothers. Deception meant for harm had led her to safety. Her desperate flight into the storm had revealed the depth of Zeke's care. And now, when they needed it most, the missing deed had surfaced like a miracle. "We'll go to that hearing with truth on our side," she said firmly. Zeke smiled, and the warmth of it reached all the way to her heart. "Yes," he agreed. "We will." Dawn broke crisp and clear on the morning of the hearing. Frost glittered on every fence post and branch, while the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside the ranch house, Matilda's hands trembled as she pinned up her hair, trying to look as respectable as possible in her best dress. Zeke had risen before first light, tending to essential chores so Cal could manage the ranch alone today. Now he stood by the wagon, his Sunday coat brushed clean, the precious Bible containing the deed tucked safely in his pocket. His breath steamed in the cold air as he helped Matilda up onto the wooden seat. "Ready?" he asked softly, wrapping a thick blanket around her shoulders. She nodded, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out. Following the rutted road toward Silver Cross, Matilda huddled close to Zeke's solid warmth, drawing courage from his calm presence. Neither spoke much during the 5-mile journey, both lost in prayer and preparation for what lay ahead. The town was already bustling when they arrived. Curious faces peered from shop windows, and clusters of people whispered as Zeke helped Matilda. Down from the wagon, the courthouse stood imposing at the end of Main Street, its wooden steps recently swept clean of snow. "Lord, give us strength," Matilda whispered, gripping Zeke's arm as they climbed those steps together. Inside, the courthouse was packed. Ranchers and townspeople filled the wooden benches, while up front sat 3 sharp-dressed railroad lawyers. From Denver, their briefcases bulging with papers, Mr. Darrow lounged nearby, a smug smile playing at his lips. Judge Harrison, gray-haired and stern-faced, called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The room fell silent, except for the crackle of the pot-bellied stove in the corner. The railroad's head lawyer rose first, unfurling maps across the judge's desk. His voice rang with practiced authority as he detailed the railroad's claim to the water rights along Silver Creek. He presented document after document, arguing that the original grants had been improperly filed. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he concluded with a flourish, "Mr. Brannon's character must be questioned, given his harboring of an unmarried woman with no proper documentation of her status." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Matilda felt her cheeks Burn, but Zeke's expression never changed. He sat straight-backed, patient as stone, waiting his turn to speak. When the judge finally called him forward, Zeke stood slowly. Before he could reach into his coat for the Bible, however, Matilda rose to her feet. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "Your Honor," she said, amazed at how steady she sounded despite her trembling hands. "I request permission to speak." Judge Harrison peered at her over his spectacles, then nodded once. "Proceed, miss." Matilda took a deep breath, feeling every eye in the room upon her. "I came to Silver Cross as a stranger, deceived and abandoned. I had nothing to my name but shame and fear. But Mr. Brannan offered me shelter without asking anything in return. I've lived under his roof these past weeks, watching him work his land with honest labor and tend his cattle with faithful care." The room had gone absolutely silent. Even the railroad lawyers had stopped shuffling their papers. "I have no stake in these water rights," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I gain nothing by speaking here today except the chance to tell the truth. I witnessed the finding of the deed myself, tucked away in Mr. Brannan's Bible where his late wife had placed it for safekeeping." Zeke stepped forward then, removing the Bible from his coat. He opened it carefully and extracted the folded document, presenting it to the judge with a small bow. Judge Harrison examined the deed closely, holding it up to the light from the windows. The railroad lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. "This deed appears perfectly legitimate," the judge announced after several long minutes. "The signatures and seals are authentic. The water rights were legally transferred to Sarah Brannan and her heirs." He looked sternly at the railroad lawyers. "Your claim is hereby dismissed. This deed takes precedence." A cheer went up from the assembled ranchers. Several men clapped Zeke on the shoulder as they filed past. Even Pastor Holt was smiling broadly. From his seat near the back, Mr. Darrow's face had turned an ugly shade of red. He stood abruptly and stalked from the courthouse without a word, shouldering roughly past the celebrating townspeople. The railroad lawyers gathered their papers with grim expressions, but the head lawyer paused beside Zeke. "Well played, Mr. Brannan. The railroad will respect the judge's ruling." After they left, only a few people remained in the courthouse. Zeke turned to Matilda, his eyes bright with pride and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "Your courage today, I don't have words." Matilda squeezed his fingers, feeling truly strong for the first time in her life. Together, they walked out into the winter sunshine, where their wagon waited to carry them home. The first whispers of spring crept across the Colorado frontier like a gentle awakening. Snow retreated from the valley floor, leaving behind rivulets of crystal-clear water that carved muddy channels through the thawing earth. Each morning brought new signs of renewal, tender grass shoots pushing through melting drifts, the return of meadowlarks to bare branches, cattle lowing contentedly in greening pastures. Matilda watched these changes from the ranch house porch, her heart both lifting and sinking with each passing day. The wooden boards beneath her feet had been swept clean of winter's dust, and morning light caught the fresh-washed windows she'd polished until they sparkled. Everything about the ranch spoke of care and attention, of a home well-tended in the newly tilled garden plot. She had planted the seeds Zeke brought from town: carrots, beans, and peas, in neat rows marked by string. Her fingers remembered the feel of the dark soil as she worked it, already imagining summer's harvest. Each morning found her there, pulling early weeds and watching for the first green sprouts to emerge. The afternoons belonged to ranch work alongside Cal, who had grown to trust her steady hands with increasingly important tasks. She could now lead the horses to water without hesitation, measure feed with confidence, and spot signs of trouble in the herd before they became serious problems. The foreman's gruff approval showed in small ways a nod here. A quiet well done there as evening settled over the land. Mathilde's voice would often rise with the wood smoke from the chimney, filling the house with hymns her mother had taught. The familiar melodies seemed to soften the shadows and warm the corners of every room. Sometimes Zeke would hum along, his deep voice harmonizing naturally with hers as they completed their evening tasks. Yet beneath this peaceful routine, Mathilde's heart grew increasingly restless. The more the ranch felt like home, the more sharply. She felt the temporary nature of her stay. She had no true claim to this place, despite how deeply she had come to love it. One mild afternoon, as she and Zeke checked fence posts along the creek, Mathilde gathered her courage. The rushing water nearly drowned her soft words. "I think I should return to Missouri when the trails are clear." Zeke's hands stilled on the wire he was testing. His broad shoulders seemed to stiffen, though his voice remained gentle. "Certain about this, it seems right," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I have a cousin there who might take me in, and you've done more than enough for me already." He turned to face her then, his expression shadowed by his hat brim. "You know you're welcome to stay." "I know," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes, "but I can't impose forever." The walk back to the ranch house stretched longer than usual, filled with things unsaid. That evening, Mathilde slipped quietly upstairs to the guest room that had sheltered her through the winter. Her few possessions fit easily into the carpetbag she'd arrived with, a patched shawl, 2 dresses, her mother's worn Bible. Each item she folded seemed to whisper of endings. Downstairs, a fire burned low in the hearth. No songs filled the kitchen that night, no quiet reading of scripture. The silence felt heavy, like a physical presence pressing against the walls in his study. Zeke knelt beside his chair, head bowed in prayer. The lamplight caught the silver threading through, his dark hair highlighting the deep lines around his eyes. His large hands, usually so sure and steady, clasped together almost desperately as he sought guidance. The choice before him seemed impossible. His heart urged him to speak, to ask her to stay not as a guest, but as something more permanent. Yet his conscience reminded him of her vulnerability, her need to make her own decisions without pressure. He had promised her safety and respect. He could not now demand she stay to ease his loneliness. Through the window, he could see stars emerging in the deepening blue of evening. The same stars would soon light Mathilde's way east, back to Missouri, away from the home she had helped rebuild from emptiness. The thought left an ache in his chest that no amount of prayer seemed to ease down her room. Mathilde stood at her own window, watching those same stars appear. The carpetbag sat packed and ready by her door, but her heart felt anything but prepared. Every creak of the house, every distant low of cattle, every whisper of wind seemed to beg her to reconsider. Yet she forced herself to remember her placid stranger taken in through kindness. Nothing more. The ranch settled into night, its inhabitants caught between duty and desire, each praying for wisdom in the quiet darkness. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold, warming the spring air with promise. Dew sparkled on new grass as Mathilde stood beside the waiting wagon, her small carpetbag at her feet. She had said her goodbyes to the ranch house already touching the smooth wooden doorframe. The familiar hearthstones, memorizing how the morning light fell across the kitchen table, where she had found such unexpected welcome. The sound of boots on packed earth made her turn. Zeke approached slowly, his broad figure outlined against the sunrise. His hat was clutched in both weathered hands, and something in his expression made her heart flutter uncertainly. He stopped a few paces away, and Mathilde saw that his eyes held a storm of emotion. "I can't let you leave," he said, his voice rough and tender. "Not without speaking what's in my heart." He took a step closer, and Mathilde caught the tremor in his hands as they gripped his hat brim. Stay here, Matilda. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Not because you feel obliged. Stay because you're wanted as my wife." The words she had scarcely dared to hope for fell like spring rain on parched earth. Tears spilled down Matilda's cheeks as understanding dawned bright and clear. She was no burden here. No temporary guest to be tolerated. She was wanted, cherished, home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching on joy. "Yes, I'll stay." From near the barn, Cal watched with quiet satisfaction as Zeke gathered Matilda close. The foreman's weathered face creased in a rare smile as he turned to lead the horses back to their stalls. No eastbound stage would be needed today or ever again. That evening, lamplight glowed warm through the ranch house windows, spilling across the yard like a blessing. Inside, Zeke and Matilda sat close together on the settle, their hands joined, as naturally as if they had never been separate. The family Bible lay open across their knees, its well-worn pages testament to enduring faith and answered prayers dot beyond the lamplit windows. The land stretched vast and peaceful under emerging stars. But it was no longer a lonely expanse. Now it was the foundation of a future built on truth and trust, where two hearts had finally found their way home. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.